Thank you, Mayor Moore. I just want to second the welcome, and it's a great crowd. Very happy to be here this morning to talk to you about a project that we worked with through the MPO and also the Tennessee Department of Transportation called Moving Tennessee Forward. And if you're not familiar with the Nashville Civic Design Center, we are a nonprofit organization based here in Nashville, and our mission is to really help the city and the citizens of the city envision a future for Nashville. And that vision involves design and the implementation of ideas and projects that help move us forward. So this Moving Tennessee Forward book, I think, is a really amazing example of how do you translate some visionary ideas into graphics and other types of innovative ways to present information to people so that they understand it and can then hopefully support those ideas. The way that this project came about is, I think it was in 2009, there was some federal level decisions that were made that the DOT and HUD and EPA should all start to actually communicate with each other. And I think that was a pretty radical and innovative thing that had happened that had really not been the case before. So that sort of inspired us when we saw that to start thinking locally. How can we begin to envision a way to start to link transportation and land use and have a conversation in Nashville and the Middle Tennessee region. So we approached the MPO and TDOT with this idea, and we were able to work out the proposal for the idea that became Moving Tennessee Forward. And you'll see here some of the 4 original ideas for the project that we approached TDOT with. And so it involved things like looking at circulators, the idea of a downtown circulator, but also how do you kind of pull out and look at circulators within communities that connect to the main arterial pikes that we have, and then also looking at the surrounding communities around Nashville and how could those small towns have connectors within them. Transit-oriented development was a very new topic for this area just even 3 or 4 years ago. And so one of the ways that we wanted to help promote the idea of transit-oriented development was through a chapter in this book. Healing the Pikes. We all are very familiar with our historic pikes in Nashville and how they radiate out from the downtown and connect to all of our the communities located around Davidson County. But if you look at those, they're often very underutilized and a lot of the infrastructure is aging. So they're really, I think, ripe for redevelopment that can help support transit and hopefully an economic boon for our future. And then finally, TDOT was very interested in this concept of looking at their bridges and how can they become beautiful symbols or gateways or entrances into our cities, and how do we start to think about them differently than just what had been a standard bridge design. So in typical nonprofit visionary form, our 4 ideas actually translated to 6 once the book came out. We like to pile work on ourselves sometimes. And these are the 6 chapters here, and you'll see. So what we actually added was this chapter called Reclaiming Public Space. And I think that's a really important chapter to look at. It's looking at underutilized right-of-way that is often just paved, and there's the potential for turning that into vibrant public space. And we see a lot of great examples from originally from San Francisco and New York that have really transformed some spaces that people would not have considered even usable. But those are vibrant hearts of communities now, and I think that we're making progress here towards thinking about that in Nashville. And then the other project was anticipating transit, because we have so many great ideas for the future in the MPO's 2035 plan on where we want transit to be, but it's not yet there. So how do we design projects that are actually transit ready and not necessarily responding to the existing conditions? So this was, when we started working with MPO, this was the framework of what we were looking at. And I don't know if this is working, I don't think this is working, but you can see how that radiates out of the middle of the image, which is Davidson County, and connects to all the other communities. This is just sort of a graphic in the book that kind of translates that into hopefully a little bit easier, understandable diagram, although not as much information is there. I love showing this image to people. I think it's so powerful to see That was the streetcar map in Nashville in 1927. So this is the transit system that we would want today, and we're trying to work back to there. As is the case of a lot of cities, we tore these out. We're now looking at how to get back to that level, I think. And so throughout the book, and I'll just, in case I forget at the end, there are copies available out in the lobby if you want to pick up one. The way that we explore each one of these chapters is initially through analyzing a precedent of examples across the country that we think can inspire us here in Nashville. And then we proceed to look at various different scales applicable to that topic. So for instance, in this chapter, this is the idea of circulators. We first began looking at the downtown core. How can circulators work there? I'm really excited and happy that this study, I think, helped inform a lot of the decisions that were made. And shortly after this project started, MTA actually began a circulator service here in Nashville, and I think it's really wonderful to see how we're making progress in this city if you just look back 2 or 3 years. The next scale is sort of zooming back again and looking at the urban communities and the urban neighborhoods around the downtown core, and we've just or about to open the Music City connector, which is or the University connector, right? That's the top, along the new connector street, the 28th, 31st Avenue, and that's another example of a visionary project that's come to fruition. Finally, or the next step is even further out. What are these community connectors? The Madison is a great example. It's a connector that just doesn't go downtown. It just connects things from Gallatin Pike through a community and back again. But it's hugely successful because people didn't have access to that main BRT line before. And then finally, we zoom out to the county level and look at the counties around us and how those connectors can happen. So some typical illustrations in this book are really about taking an existing image and then doing a photo montage of showing people what that could look like in the future. And we found that these are really super successful ways to engage the public and citizen groups and show them really in a very realistic way what something can be. Ron likes to point out in our office that this photo just happened to be taken right when all of the water lines had frozen. Remember the really cold winter in Nashville? And they had to do, Waters had to do all the work along Broadway. So it was as if they were building the transit line there. So it was, and traffic was disrupted, but everybody learned how to deal with it for the time, and they understood that, great things are happening in the future. So I think it's, we can deal with this. It's going to take a little bit, but we make do, and it was fun. This is the public space I mentioned. We looked at the Vanderbilt area. This is approximately an 8,000 square foot space, so it's pretty significant. Plans have just been announced actually to redo this intersection because there's a new development that's going up right there, and we want to be on the forefront of talking about what this space looks like when it's redesigned and how we can implement something like this. And I think it'd be a great first start for us here in Nashville in doing that. This is the Healing the Pikes idea. So you can see we're taking the standard, that could be anywhere USA as they call it, but it looks like almost every pike we have. And how do you start to do these infill projects which can be inserted into existing dimensions and right-of-way and bring the quality of life issues, the walkability, the transit components, the bikeability, mixed-use development that brings in jobs and increases our tax base and grows our community. By the way, one of the premises of this 2035 plan is that we are expected to grow by approximately 1 million people over the next 20 years or so. So how do we accommodate 1 million new people and not just make it sprawl in our typical pattern? So we think that this is the key to the future. And then this is looking at the suburban community, and this is actually a really nice different way of thinking for a shopping center. But in the future, what would that look like, or how would that function better if you added a couple levels of office or even residential above? It just makes it more successful, more walkable, and more able to support public transit. We have a wonderful relationship with the University of Tennessee College of Architecture. I'm a faculty member, I'm a lecturer, and we're able to work really well with T.K. Davis, who's a professor who does all of his projects in Nashville. And the MPO works with us to identify really key and exciting projects that we can do student work with and study ideas and promote these concepts in a non-threatening way. You know, they're not a plan. People understand these are just some student ideas that are sometimes outside the box, but they're open to that, and sometimes it'll trigger the imagination of the community or the city leaders or the department heads. This is a great example of a project that happened in Lebanon. And the class studied stops along the Music City Star. And the Lebanon terminus site was in the downtown core. The image on the left is the existing conditions, and the image on the right was with all the student projects inserted into that. And here you see various different sites of those studies that TK's class did. Here was a vision of sort of redefining the downtown square. This project was so great, I think a wonderful example, because through the process of, there was an AIA 150 anniversary that also studied the idea of a TOD in Lebanon. Then the student projects came along, and a developer sort of attended those and had the opportunity to understand TOD and see it as a different model for a development that he had planned. He went back to the designers and he said, I want to try this TOD. It was redesigned, added, because of the community input and process that had happened, the community supported it. I think they quadrupled the density that was planned for there, and not a single opposition at the zoning change. And this is actually under construction right now. This is Hamilton Springs. This is so exciting. This is the first TOD in Tennessee, one of the first in, I would say some of the first in the South. So that's kind of an overview of the Moving Tennessee Forward book. I just wanted to point out one other project that I think is really exciting. This was an idea from the Plan of Nashville. It was also an example of student work. It's looking at the Ellington Parkway terminus, and you can see that superimposed over downtown. The students did studies of this site. You can see it now in existing conditions, and that is sort of the master plan that was developed by the student work and an aerial view of it. So we're continuing to do this studies every semester and the summer as well. If you've got an idea for a really great project, let us know, because we're not running out of them, but we're always looking for potentials for how to inspire and get some concepts out to people in Nashville. And I have to say, our city is very receptive to this, I've seen. And we want to be a tool and a catalyst for helping advance the conversation about transit and development in the future for Nashville. So with that, thank you very much.